Good afternoon. My name is Colleen McFarland Rademaker, and I am the Chief Archivist at the David M. Rubenstein Institute for Holocaust Documentation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It is an honor for us to be here today to present the webinar, Preserving Holocaust History Through Artifacts and Research, in partnership with Generations of the Shoah International, World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants, Descendants of Holocaust Survivors, and LAES, the Latin American Network for the Teaching of the Holocaust. Today's program is part one of a two-part series. Next week, Sunday, June 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will present part two, Preserving Holocaust History through Oral Histories and Films. We hope you can join us for that program as well. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is in a race against time to rescue the evidence of the Holocaust from Jewish and non-Jewish victims, survivors, and eyewitnesses, as well as from members of their families, the second and third generations. The museum's David M. Rubenstein National Institute for Holocaust Documentation is responsible for building, preserving, and making accessible America's collection of record on the Holocaust, an unparalleled repository documenting the fate of victims, survivors, rescuers, liberators, and others. The collection of record also documents the atrocities perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators. We collect artifacts, documents, photographs, films, music, and oral testimonies so that researchers can study the events of the Holocaust and interpret evidence representing multiple perspectives and understand the relevance of this history in our own time. Together with you, we continue to build and preserve the collection of record on the Holocaust, striving to make it discoverable and accessible anywhere, anytime, to ensure we can impart this history with authenticity and purpose. Before we continue, a few housekeeping notes. We ask for your forgiveness if there are technical difficulties. This is a live program and anything can happen. This program is being recorded and it will be shared with our co-sponsors and on our YouTube channel for future viewing. The questions and chat functions are disabled. Because this is a webinar format program, and due to the number of people attending, we will not be taking questions. However, everyone will get a follow-up email after the program where you can ask any questions and make virtual appointments with our curators and researchers. This gathering is being offered in closed captioning, and if you would like to utilize that feature, please press the CC closed captioning button towards the bottom right of your screen. And now I would like to introduce you to Esther Finder, founder and president of Generations of the Shoah, Nevada, president of the Holocaust Survivors Group of Southern Nevada, and former president of the Generation After in the Washington, D.C. area. She is on the Coordinating Council of Generations of the Shoah International, the Executive Committee of the World Federation of Jewish Child Survivors of the Holocaust and Descendants, the Executive Committee of the Holocaust Survivors Foundation, USA, and was one of the founders of the new Holocaust Intergenerational Global Coalition. She was also appointed by the Governor of Nevada to the Advisory Council on Education relating to the Holocaust. Esther has been involved with the museum's oral history program, conducting interviews since the early days of the museum, and still conducts Holocaust survivor testimonies for the USC Shoah Foundation. She has conducted over 250 interviews for both institutions. We do appreciate Esther's commitment and thank her for helping us to make this webinar possible. Esther, I turn it over to you for your welcoming remarks.
Thank you. Excuse me. A while ago, I was participating in an online webinar for educators when it dawned on me that there were many programs offered by various institutions designed to teach teachers how to use resource materials on the Holocaust. But what about the survivors and their descendants? Nobody was teaching us about the available materials and how we might access them. So I asked if such instruction could be possible, and here we are today. There are survivors, especially child survivors, who may have gaps in their memories because nobody ever told them about what was happening in the region where they were living. There are descendants who are trying to fill in missing pieces of their family histories because they didn't think to ask their survivor detailed questions during their lifetime. My mother died before I turned 17, and her story is not recorded anywhere. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has provided me with information I never knew before, and pictures I had never seen of my mother as a young woman. This has been a precious gift. Some resources might be easily available to us online. Other materials are harder to access, and we will need professional help from the experts at the museum. The experienced staff at the USHMM will explain what is available and how best to proceed. The 2 sessions in this series will be recorded, so you can watch them again if questions arise in the future, or if you just want to see part of this again. Our heartfelt thanks to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for doing this, so we too can do our best to preserve and protect the legacy of our families with the accuracy and integrity it is due.
Thank you, Esther. Before I introduce today's speakers, who are 2 of my 80+ outstanding Rubenstein Institute colleagues, I'd like to take a moment to explain our relationships to each other and to the work of the Institute. As an archivist who oversees the description and cataloging of all unpublished materials in the collection of record, my team and I sit in the middle of the Rubenstein Institute's workflow between the 2 speakers you will hear from today. When you think about the work of building and maintaining the collection of record, you probably think about the most visible parts of that work, the acquisition of materials for the collection and the presentation of those materials to researchers in a reading room or in a museum exhibition. If you come visit us at the David and Fela Chappelle Family Collections Conservation and Research Center in Maryland, you will see a host of other, less visible activities: labeling, rehousing, and properly storing collections, stabilizing and treating fragile or damaged materials, digitizing and photographing collections to be shared online, and, my favorite, describing and cataloging the collections. The Rubenstein Institute's team of 12 archivists and catalogers write the descriptions and assign the indexing terms that make collection materials searchable through our online collection search portal. When you enter a word or name in that search box, it is the work of the archivists and catalogers that make the retrieval of collection descriptions and digitized collections possible. But we don't just describe materials so that researchers can find them today. Our work honors the survivors and memorializes the victims of the Holocaust, ensuring that their names and their experiences live on. Our work also serves the collection's future, making certain that the information about the collections, often provided by survivors or their families at the time of donation, remains associated with the collections so that they can be interpreted and understood for generations to come. Our first speaker, Fred Wasserman, is an acquisitions curator in the Curatorial Affairs branch and has been with the museum for more than 8 years. He has previously served as the Deputy Director for Programs at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco and as the Henry J. Lair Curator at the Jewish Museum in New York. Fred also curated the permanent exhibitions at the Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration, co-curated Becoming Visible, The Legacy of Stonewall at the New York Public Library, and was the founding director of the Lubomel Exhibition Project. His exhibitions have been honored with awards from the International Association of Art Critics, the American Association of State and Local History, and the Society of American Archivists. Our second speaker, Dr. Diane Afoumado, is the chief of the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She has worked at the museum for 15 years, and prior to that, she was a research fellow. Diane is a former assistant professor of contemporary history at the University of Paris 10, Nanterre, and the Institut National des Langues et Civilisations Orientales in Paris. She also previously worked for the two French commissions related to compensation for Jewish victims and as a historian for the archival division of the Centre de Documentation Juive Contemporaine Mémorial de la Shoah. She's the author of several books on the Holocaust and Jewish refugees in the 1930s. And now I will turn it over to Fred.
Thank you, Colleen, for that nice introduction. And thanks to all of you who are spending part of your Sunday with us. In my 8 years working as an acquisitions curator for the Holocaust Museum, I've met with hundreds of donors to our collection. And I'm pleased to be able to speak to you today because, as Colleen mentioned, we are in the midst of an intensive effort to rescue the evidence of the Holocaust, particularly as the wartime generation passes. The museum collects documents, letters, photographs, artwork, and artifacts related to the period of Nazi occupation, the war years, and life in the displaced persons camps. We also collect home movies and music, as well as oral histories and memoirs. We document the lives of victims who were displaced, persecuted, and discriminated against by the racial, religious, ethnic, social, and political policies of the Nazis and their allies. The museum also collects materials related to witnesses, bystanders, and perpetrators. The story of Americans in the Holocaust is another focus, including many GI collections. Potential donors contact us through the museum's website, as well as by telephone, letters, and email. Sometimes they even approach museum staff in the lobby, wanting to speak to someone about their memorabilia. We typically acquire 1 or 2 collections a day. And last year we brought in 457 collections. When the curators meet with donors and their families, we gather information so that we can write a short biography about the survivor and their family's experiences during the Holocaust. This way, we are documenting the backstory behind a letter, a passport, or a child's doll. And this information travels with the artifact. Here you see me meeting with Norman Miller, who at age 15 left Germany on a kinder transport to England, just 3 days before the outbreak of war. In addition to exhibitions, the museum's collections are used in myriad ways. In publications and educational curricula, films and television shows in order to lend authenticity, and in loans to other museums. The collections are actively used by scholars, researchers, and the general public. Many of our holdings can be viewed on the museum's website at www.ushm.org. And in this way, we are able to reach a global audience. Here you see the webpage where you can search our collection. The heart and soul of our collection are the documents, photos, and artifacts that reveal the stories of individual families. So today, I'd like to share 3 collections with you. Michael Grumbaum was from a wealthy Jewish family in Prague. We see him and his sister on the right, and his parents on the left. His father was a successful attorney who was in England in March 1939 when Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. He quickly rushed home to protect his family, but in 1941, Michael's father was arrested by the Gestapo and executed. The following year, Michael, his mother Margaret, and his sister Marietta were deported to Terezin, also known as Theresienstadt. More than 60 years later, in 2006, Michael Grunbaum donated a collection that features two particularly noteworthy items: a large scrapbook with a burlap cover that his mother, Margaret Grunbaum, assembled, which we see here, and Michael's own memory book with autographs from his friends in Terezin. To the world at large, the Germans promoted Theresienstadt as a model camp ghetto through deceitful propaganda. But Margaret and Michael's treasured compendiums give us windows onto the actual lives of those who were imprisoned in the camp. They are also important because, unlike most of their fellow prisoners, the Grunbaums survived despite the odds. More than 80% of the Jews who were transferred to Terezin, including 90% of the children, were killed, either there or in other camps. Margaret Grunbaum saved almost every piece of paper from her time in the camp: receipts, notifications, flyers, stamps, artwork, postcards, and other documents from wartime Terezin. And after she was liberated, she compiled all of this ephemera into an album. An assemblage like this is an extraordinarily complete record of life in the camp, as it documents work assignments, ration cards, and other bits of daily life. A particularly significant page features these two yellow stars that the Grunbaums had to wear in Prague after the Nazis took over. Our conservators have since removed the Scotch tape, which, needless to say, is not good for long-term preservation. We also see the numbers 977, 978, and 979. These were the deportation orders for Margaret, Michael, and Marietta to be sent to Terezin. And at the upper right is a postcard of the ghetto camp that Margaret acquired after their liberation. At the camp ghetto, Margaret worked in the toy factory, making teddy bears that were sent to the Reich for Christmas. So in the fall of 1944, when the Grunbaums were put on a deportation train to Auschwitz, Margaret said to her supervisor, quote, "If I'm on that train, we won't finish the order." And so she and her children were allowed to get off the train. And in her scrapbook, Margaret preserved both their order to go to Auschwitz and also the letter taking them off the train. It would appear that the interest in preserving one's history ran deep in this family, because the other major item in this collection is 13-year-old Michael Grunbaum's memory book entitled Pamotnik, created by him and his friends while living in the boys' dormitory in Terezin. The book features drawings, poetry, and autographs from Michael's closest friends. One of them made this wonderful drawing of Mickey Mouse. The translation of the page reads, quote, "Measure twice, cut once, in memory of my home, Nesharim. Your friend, Martin." In Hebrew, Nesharim means eagles, and this is the name that Michael's group of some 40 boys coined for themselves as they found friendship and community in the midst of their confinement in the camp. Many of the pages are typical of autograph album entries, with well-wishing poems and drawings, but others are haunting. The page on the right shows a drawing of a train headed from Terezin to Birkenau, where a policeman is waiting to greet it. The text reads, quote, "Until the time improves and I will be home again. Remember me, your friend Coco, parens Heller." We know that Coco was deported to Auschwitz in October 1944 and murdered at the age of 13. Ada Breitkopf Abrahammer and her parents lived in Krakow, Poland, when Germany invaded in 1939. Ada, an only child, was 18 years old. Her father, Gustav, fled east under the common assumption that only men were in danger. Ada, her mother, Erna, and her grandmother remained at home until they were forced into the Krakow ghetto in April 1941. In this round photo, we see Ada in the ghetto that year. It's even annotated on the back. Shortly before the ghetto was liquidated, Ada's grandmother passed away. And in March 1943, Ada and her mother were sent to the Plaszow concentration camp. After a month under horrific conditions, they were selected to work in Oskar Schindler's airplane parts factory for more than a year. And then Ada was sent back to Plaszow. In October 1944, she was deported to Auschwitz, where she stayed for only 3 weeks before being sent to a subcamp, where Ada worked in a flax spinning factory. Her mother was sent to a different concentration camp and died in the Skorzysko Kamina slave labor camp in 1944. Ada was finally liberated by the Russian army on May 6, 1945. After liberation, she briefly went to Krakow before making her way to the Bindermichel displaced persons camp near Linz, Austria, where she met Raphael Abrahammer, a jeweler who had fled east and was held in Russian prisoner of war camps. They married on March 30th, 1947, and immigrated to the US in October 1948. Among the many photos in the Ada Abrahammer papers is this one on the upper right of Ada in the DP camp. And below that, Ada aboard the steamship USS General Black en route to the US. Throughout her ordeal, Ada kept a diary recording her experiences. It was confiscated on 3 occasions, but to quote her, "Miraculously, I was able to get it back each time." And now I would like to play a short clip from an oral history that Ada Abrahammer gave in 1989. She is reading a passage from her diary about life in the Plaszow concentration camp in the fall of 1944. The original is in Polish, but here Ada reads from her English translation.
Everybody flocks together around the oven. They are cold. The delicious smell of soup pleasantly tickles their nostrils. Suddenly, 6, which means attention. What is it? Somebody is passing by the latrine, some over or under or some other such pest. Instantaneous silence falls upon the latrine. Pest. And again the clatter goes on. Often the German capoman comes in without warning and chases everyone out. This creates a small commotion. The ones that choose to stay quickly raise their dresses and sit on the first unoccupied toilet. Who is bashful here? We? Or maybe he, the capo? And exactly that is why life here is so horrible, because it is stripped of everything that is human and normal, because whoever would believe me if I tried to tell all that? Exaggeration, one will say. I have written this there and then. Unfortunately, all true. Is it normal to cook and to eat your meal in the bathroom? Can anyone imagine the macabre picture of an average evening in camp, where up there you see the blazing flames, they are burning the dugout corpses, and here on the camp pathway under the barrack windows there is given a concert? Here are the famous Krakow musicians that are playing sweet Vienna waltzes, hot czardashes, or sentimental tangos. Will he, to whom we tell our story, live through with us the moments full of horror, animal fear of death, moments full of dread, horrible nightmare?
It is just amazing to have this kind of rare account written at the time that captures a survivor's life in forced labor, concentration, and displaced persons camps. And it is so striking that Ada clearly wrote her diary with what I would call an historical consciousness about the importance of the record that she was keeping. And indeed, according to Ada's daughter, Nora Abrahammer, quote, "The diary was her life's obsession after the war, to bear witness to her experiences and the Holocaust. It was her dying wish that the diary be donated to the museum, and it was my honor to then do that for her." In 2015, I met with Sigrid Jean Ansbacher Strauss, who donated a fascinating group of memorabilia that allows us to chart her story in detail. When the situation for Jews became too difficult in the small town of Dinkelsbühl, Sigrid's family moved to Frankfurt in 1937. Here we see a photo of the Ansbacher family, as well as one of the yellow stars that they had to wear. In 1939, Sigrid's older brother Manfred was sent via England to Australia. Sigrid and her other brother Heinz planned to join him there, but after they obtained visas, ships stopped sailing to Australia. In May 1942, Heinz was called for deportation and was killed in Majdanek at age 17. A few months later, Sigrid and her parents were deported from Frankfurt to Theresienstadt in September 1942. 2 years later, in October 1944, Sigrid was to be sent from the camp to an unknown destination. Here on the left, we see the note that her mother Selma sent to the authorities at Theresienstadt, pleading with them not to send her daughter away, but they didn't listen. The Ansbachers didn't know where Sigrid was being sent, but at Theresienstadt there were rumors about a place called Auschwitz. So before Sigrid left, she and her parents made up a code. If she ended up in Auschwitz, she would send them a postcard with her name signed in a particular German script. It's a modest piece of correspondence, but it's important because it shows that the Ansbachers didn't act like they were passive victims, but they had agency and found a way to communicate under very difficult and unknown circumstances. The postcard was, in its way, a small act of resistance. Sigrid was only in Auschwitz for 6 days. Then she and the other girls were sent to Kurzbach, where they had to dig tank traps outdoors in frigid weather. From there, they were marched more than 40 miles to Gross-Rosen concentration camp under the threat of being shot. And after 10 days there, Sigrid was shipped to Mauthausen and then on to Bergen-Belsen, where she was liberated by the British on April 15, 1945. Sigrid had some kind of typhus, and she didn't want to stay in Germany. So she was sent to Sweden, where she was successively in a hospital, a rehabilitation center, and finally on her own, working in a chocolate factory while she tried to get emigration papers. Here we see Sigrid's Swedish photo album. She's the young woman in the top left photo on the right-hand page. When I met with Sigrid, she told me how embarrassed she was by how short her hair was right after the war. And in the other photos, we can see her friends, refugees from a host of European countries. For the first few months in Sweden, Sigrid still didn't know what had happened to her parents, or whether they had even survived. In August 1945, Sigrid's uncle, James Anson, who was living in Boston, saw a copy of the Aufbau, in which she was listed among the survivors in Sweden. This was a New York newspaper for German Jewish refugees. As you can see here, James Anson circled Sigrid's name in orange crayon and wrote "hurrah" in the margin. And to be honest, I'm getting chills as I do every time I see this Aufbau. James Anson immediately wrote to his niece Sigrid in Sweden, telling her that her parents had survived to Theresienstadt and had returned to Frankfurt. This is that letter. In December 1946, Sigrid finally traveled to New York, where she was reunited with her parents, who had arrived 6 months earlier. I have remained in touch with Sigrid over the years, and when I recently spoke to her and asked her about why she had donated her collection to the museum, she said, quote, "I know that my collection is going to be preserved and it will be in a safe place. I hope other people will do the same thing. Take advantage of being able to give their papers to the museum so that someone can always find them there and look them up." I think that Sigrid speaks for many of our donors. And in that spirit, if any of you or your families or friends are survivors or victims of the Holocaust who have documents, photos, or artifacts that you may wish to donate, the museum would like to hear from you. You can email us at curator@ushmm.org. All of the papers and artifacts that I've presented today, and hundreds and thousands more, provide rich materials for scholars, families, and museum staff to conduct wide-ranging research. And now I would like to hand over the floor to Diane, who will tell you a little more about the museum's research services.
Thank you, Fred. The museum's Rubinstein National Institute for Holocaust Documentation is committed to document the atrocities perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators by acquiring, preserving, and making this evidence accessible to everyone. This evidence also supports the museum's wide-ranging efforts in the areas of research, exhibitions, publications, education, and commemoration, and should be preserved for future generations to come. Today, I'm going to focus on the research services that the museum provides to show you why it is critical for us to continue collecting from people and from institutions so that we, with my team, we can use those documents to conduct research. As Esther mentioned, we still uncover documents that family members have never seen or known existed. And it is not rare that those documents change people's lives. Seeing a father's signature on a document, discovering the camps a grandmother was deported to, learning a great-uncle survived the war, or even knowing that there is a grave location somewhere that you can maybe go to pay respect are only a few examples of the nature of the information that we provide. But for those of you who would like to start researching by yourself, I would like to start with some of the online resources that you could explore to learn about various topics such as the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and Holocaust denial, or contemporary genocide. One of the most important tools that you could access online is the Holocaust Encyclopedia. You can search it by keywords, and you will find some articles, illustrations, maps, videos, testimonies, to cite only a few examples. If you're looking for information about a particular camp or a ghetto, I would recommend that you search the Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos that would provide some historical background for your research. In the encyclopedia, you'll find information about more than 44,000 camps, ghettos, and other sites of detention, persecution, forced labor, and murder during the Holocaust. You can also access some of the past exhibitions online. Here you see 3 examples. Those mini websites contain a lot of information and documents to learn about a particular topic. Here are 3 additional exhibitions. Among the most recent ones, The State of Deception, The Power of Nazi Propaganda, that is so relevant today to understand how propaganda can impact people's minds. This is also a useful source to learn the appropriate terminology so that one can identify instances where Holocaust-related vocabulary is misrepresented or misappropriated on purpose. For those of you who are interested in our collections, you can search our online catalog. Part of our collections is digitized and accessible online. Recently, we added archival collections from Ukraine, as you can see in the middle of the slide. Now more than ever, it appears a moral imperative to make Ukrainian records digitally available. Over the past 25 years, the museum has partnered with Ukrainian state archives to copy more than 10 million pages of archival materials and to provide the source archives themselves and the museum with digital copies. These collections include archival materials related to the interwar, wartime, and post-war until the 1960s and the history of the Jewish communities of Ukraine. Those collections are now consulted daily and by many people in the US and around the world. Another important collection that you may want to browse is composed of digitized diaries that provide information about personal experience during the Holocaust. The online catalog gives you access to personal collections given by families, but also from institutions around the world. Personal and institutional collections are critical for research and are used by a large variety of people, such as Holocaust survivors, families of victims, scholars, researchers, teachers, and documentary filmmakers. The museum built unique Holocaust-related collections, and I'm going to show you how those collections are used to research about individuals. Whatever we are able to find in our collections allows researchers to tell stories and to write history. If you are searching for information about the fate of a person between 1933 and 1945, you may want to consult the database of Holocaust survivors and victims. If you know of someone who survived the persecutions between 1933 and 1945, you could also register that person as a survivor. We search this unique database of survivors daily, and sometimes we're able to reconnect family members. In addition to what you can access yourself on our website, you may want to submit a research request. The Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center will conduct a complete research for you and will send you digital copies of documents if we find any. In order to open a request with us, go online and click on the research services, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here. You will have to fill out a form and we will conduct the research for you. Let me show you how this works and by sharing some research results with you. In 2012, two French historians came to the museum to trace the fate of 991 Jews from Lens in the north of France during the war. We helped them search our collections and piece together the stories of each of them. The book whose cover you see is the result of this research at the museum. The upper right photo is Barbara Gluck, the director of the Mauthausen Memorial in Austria, who was a research fellow at the museum. She spent time searching biographies of former prisoners at Mauthausen and its subcamps for whom they did not have the documents in the Mauthausen Memorial. And the gentleman holding a print of his displaced person registration card considered this document as his birth certificate because he was born in a DP camp and does not have a regular birth certificate. You notice that these three research projects had different purposes, but they were possible because all the collections are accessible in one place at the museum. If you submit a research to the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center staff, we will start researching the International Tracing Service Digital Archives, or ITS in short, and continue exploring other resources at the museum, as you can see on the slide. We might also complete the research with some external resources such as Ancestry.com, JewishGen, and Yad Vashem, to cite only a few. Our collections are used daily by the Resource Center's research team, and you probably understood by now that this is not genealogy. When searching our collections, we don't only look at archival materials, we look at people's lives. Our work is about piecing together some documented facts of people's fates that next generation can pass on. The museum has always provided research assistance, but everything changed in December 2007 when the USHMM became the national repository of the International Tracing Service Digital Archive. There is definitely a before and an after, because that collection brought a lot of new information, especially about individuals. The original documents are located in Bad Arolsen, Germany, where they are kept in various rooms and buildings, as you can see on this photograph. But at the museum, we searched the entire collection on our computers. So let me share with you how we use all those collections to tell stories. Sometimes our research leads to unexpected outcomes. I'd like to tell you the story of a family reunion. It is not rare for us to be able to reunite people so many years after the Holocaust. Iris Safrir, who lives in Israel, contacted the museum several years ago to initiate a search on behalf and about her father, Yehoshua Lieblich, who survived the Holocaust. Iris also inquired about Yehoshua's siblings who, according to what she knew, had all been murdered. The research started with the basic information that we need: a full name, Yehoshua Lieblich, a place of birth, Yehoshua was born in Krakow, Poland, and a date of birth, sometimes approximate or just a year like we have here, 1926. Fred showed you some documents that were donated by a family. Those documents can sometimes be complemented by the collections that the museum copies from around the world and that are precious for researchers. There we can add more pieces to the puzzle that we try to reconstruct. For example, here, Yehoshua was living in Krakow, as you can see on this ID card. This document comes from a collection that contains forms filled out by Jews requesting ID cards and admission into the Jewish district of Krakow. The forms include ID card number, first and last name, maiden name, if married, date and place of birth, nationality, previous occupation, current occupation, dependent status, marital status, current address, and a photo. If the person has children, their names and dates of birth are included on the form as well. After the German troops invaded Poland in September 1939, Krakow served as the capital of the General Gouvernement. Between May 1940 and March 1941, about 40,000 Jews were deported from Krakow, leaving only 11,000 Jews in the city. In March 1941, the Krakow ghetto was established and 18,000 Jews were incarcerated. The deportations of the Jews from the Krakow ghetto to Auschwitz and Belzec started a year later. When the SS liquidated the Krakow ghetto in March 1943, about 2,000 Jews who remained in the Krakow ghetto were sent to the Plaszow labor camp. Others were sent to Auschwitz. We found that Yehoshua was deported to Auschwitz and later on was transferred to Buna Monowitz. In January 1945, when the Soviet army approached the Auschwitz concentration camp complex, the SS evacuated the prisoners. Yehoshua was part of what came to be called a death march. The documents show that he was later in Buchenwald, where he was registered as Schlosser, metal worker, and received the prisoner number 121757. On his Buchenwald effect card, you can see Yehoshua's signature. Yehoshua survived and was liberated by the US Army in April 1945. He was registered as a displaced person by the Allied Expeditionary Force. When asked where he wanted to go, Yehoshua answered, Palestine. This was before the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. Then we continued the research with Yehoshua's sister, Leah, or Chandelier, also born in Krakow, and for whom we had an exact date of birth, January 1st, 1923. Based on the information provided by Iris Tafrir, we found 58 pages of documentation about Leah. Like Yehoshua, Leah was also deported from Krakow. She arrived at Buchenwald on August 4th, 1944. But to our surprise, we found post-war materials indicating that she, too, had survived. She was in a displaced person camp near Eggenfelden in Bavaria, Germany, in August 1946. And when asked where she wanted to go, she too stated Palestine. Now I'm going to let Iris Tafrir tell you the rest of the story and about the dramatic transformation that took place in her family as a result of the research. Iris and her brother made a family video that we edited down for today's presentation. Please note that the video ends abruptly.
אני עובדת על ספר, באמת ספר שהמטרה של הספר זה לספר לילדים שלי מה זה אומר להיות דור שני, ובתור זה לשלב את מה שההורים שלנו עברו, ובאמת להעביר לדור הבא איך להיות עם אומץ, ובאמת להמשיך בחיים, וכל הנקודה זה לחיות, לא לחיות בעבר, אלא לחיות קדימה בעתיד. ובמשך הספר הזה אני עושה כל מיני מחקרים. והיה לי איזו סוגיה שבדקתי אותה בקשר למתי שהמשפחה נכנסה לתוך גטו קרקוב. ישבתי מול המחשב, חשבתי, הסתכלתי, בדקתי. אמרתי, מי יעזור לי? והחלטתי לפנות למוזיאון השואה בארצות הברית. והחלטתי פשוט לשאול שאילתות על כל האחים והאחיות של אבא, של סבא יהושע. וקיבלתי תשובות בחזרה, ופתאום האחות הגדולה שלו, שנדליה, בתשובה שקיבלתי במוזיאון השואה בארצות הברית, הם שולחים לי מעל 50 מסמכים. הייתי בשוק מוחלט.
אני הגעתי למייל הזה, זה יומיים אחרי זה, באיזה יום ראשון לפני שבועיים. וישבתי מ-10 בלילה, אני חושב עד 2-3 לפנות בוקר. פתאום הבנתי, אני ראיתי שם שהתוצאה של מה שכתוב שם, שיש סיכוי סביר שהאחות שלי יהושע חיה.
אסף אחרי יומיים מתקשר, אומר, תשמעו, שנדל לא נספתה בשואה, ולא רק זה, היא עלתה לארץ.
אחרי זה, אחר הצהריים, הוא שולח לי תמונה של המצבה של שיינדל, הוא מתקשר אליי, הוא אומר, תשמע, הסתכלתי בדפים שהעבירו לי חבר'ה קדישה, יש לה גם 2 ילדים.
בן ובת.
בן ובת.
הוא מקבל טלפון, וחנה יודעת שנסעתי לבקר. היא אומרת, אתה מוכרח לשמוע משהו חשוב. אמרתי, אני פה באמצע העניין, רק תשמע משפט, שלא תופתע, תכף יצלצל אליך מישהו, יש לך דוד.
פתאום להרגיש שיש משפחה, ולחלוק איתם את החוויות, ולזוז קדימה, ולראות שיש עתיד עם משפחה, זה חוויה אחרת לגמרי.
הם יצטרפו, ואנחנו נצטרף אליהם, ונמשיך.
אני מרגיש שאני לא...
It is hard to follow up after such a video. If you're interested in researching individuals, you will be able to make research appointments with researchers from the Resource Center. Thank you for joining us today, and now I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Colleen.
Thank you, Diane. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our program. I would like to acknowledge and thank my colleagues, Fred Wasserman and Diane Afoumado, for their informative presentations, the museum's behind-the-scene team who helped us produce this program, and our partners, Esther Finder, Generations of the Shoah International, World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants, Descendants of Holocaust Survivors, and LEAS, the Latin American Network for the Teaching of the Holocaust. And last but not least, we want to thank you, the audience, for joining us. As a reminder, everybody will receive a follow-up email by the end of this week with links for requesting research assistance, donating artifacts, and contributing an oral history to the museum. We do encourage you to reach out to us. Also, next Sunday, June 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will present the second part of this series, Preserving Holocaust History through Oral Histories and Films. We hope you can join us then as well. Again, thank you for attending and be well.